Imagine for a second that you decide to move into this massive house with half a dozen complete strangers.
Oh, boy. Sounds like a terrible idea already.
Right. I mean, you all come from wildly different backgrounds. You have different habits, different diets, and you don't even really speak the same language.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Totally. But to force yourselves to bond and, become a true family, you come up with this radical idea. You decide you are all going to share a single bank account.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Your paychecks go into the exact same pot. You pay your bills from the same pot. And common sense, and let's be honest, probably a lot of wishful thinking, says that sharing this wallet will eventually force you to compromise, right?
That's the theory.
Yeah, like you'll learn to agree on what groceries to buy or what temperature to keep the thermostat, and eventually, your values will just align.
It sounds like the premise of a totally disastrous reality television show, honestly.
It really does. But the crazy thing is, that is essentially the exact premise of the most ambitious geopolitical experiment of the modern era. And today, we're doing a deep dive into a sweeping, monumental new study that reveals the brutal truth about that experiment.
It is a brutal truth.
It is, because sharing a bank account does not make you a family. In fact, the data you're looking at today suggests it might actually make you absolutely despise your roommates.
Yeah, we are looking at a terrifying dynamic here.
We really are. The more people integrate their economies, the more their cultures and their politics seem to, violently split apart. Economic unity was supposed to be this absolute guarantee of cultural harmony.
But it was a complete illusion.
A total lie. The exact opposite happened.
Yeah, we are looking at a true paradigm-shifting piece of research today. This isn't just some opinion piece in a newspaper. We are diving into this massive structural analysis conducted by a veritable dream team of top-tier economists.
Right, we've got Alberto Alesina, Guido Tabellini, and Francesco Trebbi. Absolute heavyweights.
Absolute heavyweights. And what they set out to do was answer one incredibly difficult, somewhat brutal question. Is Europe actually an optimal political area?
Right.
Can a union of this specific nature physically and mathematically survive?
And our mission today for this deep dive is to strip away all the academic jargon and really get down to the bone.
Exactly. No dry textbooks here.
No, definitely not. We aren't going to just throw high-level macroeconomic terms around. We want to look at the raw numbers, the citizen surveys, and the hard, face-slapping facts about human nature.
Because while this study focuses heavily on the European Union, it's really a mirror held up to human psychology.
Yes. What happens when you force fiercely independent cultures to share a currency, to operate under the exact same financial rules without actually doing the agonizing work of building a shared soul first?
That is the core tension right there. When you strip away all the lofty political speeches in Brussels, the treaties, the grand declarations of unity.
All the nice-sounding stuff on TV?
Right. When you strip all that away, you are left with the cold, hard data of how millions of people actually live, how they manage their money, how they perceive their neighbors, and ultimately how they vote.
Okay, I want to start by going back in time a little bit to set the stage. We really need to look at the 1990s.
Ah, the golden age.
Yeah, for a lot of people, the 1990s felt like this golden age of global optimism, especially in Europe. The Berlin Wall had fallen, the Cold War was over, and the data from that decade actually showed an absolute miracle in terms of economic catch-up.
It was incredible to watch.
Poorer European countries were finally, tangibly closing the prosperity gap with the rich ones.
They were. It was a beautiful trajectory to look at on a graph. Economists refer to this specific phenomenon as beta convergence.
Okay, wait, beta, what? Let's hold on that for a second. For you listening right now who haven't taken a macroeconomics class recently, what exactly is beta convergence? We really need to unpack how this actually works in practice without the jargon.
Sure, let's visualize it. Imagine a scatter plot graph. On the bottom horizontal axis, you map out how wealthy a country is at the starting line.
Right.
So let's say the year 1980.
Got it.
And then on the vertical axis, you plot how fast their economy grows over the next decade.
Okay, so wealth on the bottom, speed of growth on the side.
Exactly. Now, if beta convergence is actually happening, you will see a downward sloping line. The countries that started out poor, like Greece or Portugal or Spain, they have a very high growth rate.
Right, they're sprinting.
They are sprinting. Meanwhile, the countries that started out rich, like Germany or the Netherlands, have a much lower, steadier growth rate. They're just jogging.
Okay, but why does that happen naturally?
The logic is that capital flows to where it is scarce because there are more obvious opportunities for rapid development and really high returns. So the poorer countries grow faster, and the gap between the rich and the poor visibly shrinks.
So if you were a citizen living in Spain or Ireland in the 1980s and 1990s, you could physically feel your country leveling up.
Oh, absolutely.
You were catching up to the German standard of living? You could see the roads getting better, the wages going up.
You were. The continent was structurally equalizing, the convergence was real, it was measurable, and it was highly encouraging for all the architects of European integration.
But then, and this is where the story gets crazy, we hit a fatal turning point.
The launch of the euro.
Right. The assumption was that introducing a single currency, the euro, would act like rocket fuel for this convergence.
That was the promise.
Like, if they were catching up with different currencies, imagine how fast they would catch up with the exact same currency. But the euro didn't cement the miracle. It assassinated it.
It completely killed it. The timeline and the data is just stunningly clear. In 1999, the euro is officially launched. The member states log in their exchange rates and hand over control of their money.
And that beautiful downward-sloping line of beta convergence.
It completely flatlines.
Wow.
It becomes a totally flat horizontal line. The poorer countries just stopped gaining ground. The historical catch-up totally froze in place.
Wait, I really need to push back on this, or at least try to visualize the mechanics here. The single currency acted like a giant pause button on prosperity for the poorer countries.
That's exactly what the data shows.
It's like, it's like a track coach deciding that to make the team more unified, everyone has to wear a size 9 shoe.
I like that.
Right. On paper, everyone matches perfectly, the team looks incredibly uniform, but suddenly the runners with size 11 feet and runners with size 7 feet can't actually run anymore. Their performance just plummets.
That analogy perfectly isolates the problem of applying a rigid, uniform policy to highly diverse underlying conditions.
Because its economies were completely different sizes.
Yes. When you have a shared currency, you enforce a single monetary policy across economies that are fundamentally structured differently. Here's the mechanism we really need to understand. Before the euro, if an economy like Greece or Italy started to become uncompetitive,
Like if things got too expensive.
yeah, let's say their domestic wages grew faster than their actual productivity, or their manufacturing sector became really inefficient. They had a natural macroeconomic release valve.
They could devalue their own money.
Correct. The central bank in Rome or Athens could literally devalue the lira or the drachma.
Which hurts locally, right.
It's a very painful process. It makes importing goods much more expensive for your everyday citizens. But, and this is key, it instantly makes your country's exports significantly cheaper on the global market.
Oh, right. So suddenly Italian cars or Greek olive oil are super cheap for everyone else to buy.
Exactly. And it makes your country highly attractive to foreign tourists. It acts as an automatic stabilizer to keep your economy competitive and functioning, even if your internal efficiency isn't, perfect.
But the moment you join the Eurozone, you willingly hand over the keys to that release valve.
You lock it away in a vault in Frankfurt. You lose it entirely.
That's terrifying.
It is. You are now permanently locked into an exchange rate and an interest rate that is dictated by the average needs of the entire continent.
Which, let's be real, is heavily weighted toward the needs of the strongest economy, which is Germany.
Precisely. So what happened in the early 2000s? When these poorer countries adopted the euro, the global financial markets suddenly looked at Greek or Spanish debt and said, well, they use the same currency as Germany now. They must be as safe as Germany.
Oh, wow. So the risk premium just evaporated.
It vanished overnight. These countries suddenly gained access to historically unprecedented, incredibly cheap credit.
I think anyone who has ever been handed a massive credit card limit in their early 20s knows exactly where this is going.
It rarely ends well.
No. When cheap money floods in, it doesn't usually go toward building highly efficient, globally competitive factories or, investing in painful, long-term technological innovation.
No, it went into the path of least resistance. The data shows this cheap credit just flooded into non-tradable sectors. It fueled massive real estate bubbles, particularly in places like Spain and Ireland.
They just built houses everywhere.
Exactly. It went into domestic consumption and hugely expanded government spending.
So it acted like a giant financial painkiller.
A morphine drip. Historically, the pain of high interest rates and a weak currency forces politicians to do the agonizing surgery of economic reform.
Right, because they have no other choice.
Exactly. It forces them to change rigid labor laws, to cut bloated bureaucracy, to invest in productivity. But the euro provided a limitless supply of cheap, German-backed painkillers.
So the struggling economies felt fantastic.
They felt incredibly rich, so they canceled the surgery, they abandoned all the hard reforms, and when the painkiller eventually wore off, which it did spectacularly in the late 2000s, the fundamental catching-up process had been dead for a decade.
Wow. But the researchers also point out something that feels almost contradictory here. At the exact same time that the prosperity catch-up froze, the business cycles of these different countries synchronized perfectly.
Yes, the economic pulses align.
Meaning what exactly?
The year-to-year volatility, the swings in economic output, they became highly coordinated across national and even subnational borders. So when the German economy ticked upward, the Spanish economy ticked upward. When the French economy dipped, the Italian economy dipped.
So the whole continent was basically breathing together.
They were breathing together, yes.
Okay, so let's look at this paradox. They are breathing together, their economic fluctuations are pulsing in absolute unison, but the actual ground-level prosperity of the people has completely stopped converging.
Right.
Which brings up a massive question. Think about your own neighborhood for a second. If the poorer side of town stops catching up to the richer side of town, you would assume overall inequality would explode, right?
That's the natural assumption.
Yeah. If the convergence flatlined in 1999, why didn't overall inequality across the European continent just skyrocket?
That is where the researchers uncovered a bizarre, almost unbelievable balancing act. They looked at the overall income inequality for all citizens across the entire continent over a 30-year period. And to do this, they used the Gini coefficient.
Okay, let's do another quick definition for the listener. The Gini coefficient is basically a mathematical visualization of inequality.
Right.
So if one single person holds all the wealth in a society, the score is a 1. But if every single person has the exact same amount of money down to the penny, the score is a 0. So you're looking at a scale from total equality to total monopoly.
Exactly. And when the researchers plotted the total continent-wide Gini coefficient for Europe from the 1980s through the 2000s, the line didn't move an inch.
Not an inch.
It was perfectly, stubbornly flat. Total inequality remained completely static.
Wait, how is that mathematically possible? If the poorer nations stopped catching up to the richer nations, shouldn't the inequality metric have worsened?
It comes down to two opposing forces pushing against each other with exact equal pressure. You have to look at the gap between countries and the gap within countries.
Okay.
In the early years, the gap between a country like Greece and a country like Germany was shrinking slightly.
Right, the beta convergence.
Yes. But that shrinking was perfectly mathematically canceled out by the exploding gap between the rich and the poor inside those individual countries.
Okay, let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. The distance between the average Greek citizen and the average German citizen might have closed by a few inches. But the distance between the wealthiest tech CEO in Athens and the poorest waiter in Athens exploded by those exact same few inches.
You've isolated the exact dynamic. The forces of macroeconomic convergence between the nations were completely neutralized by the forces of extreme class division inside those nations.
Wow. So the rising tide of the 1990s and the cheap credit of the 2000s didn't lift all boats equally.
Not at all. It lifted the yachts and it left the rowboats totally behind. And because these two trends pushed in perfectly opposite directions, the overall statistical picture of European inequality remained completely frozen for 3 decades.
That is wild. It means the stability was an illusion hiding massive internal stress.
Absolutely.
If the economic engine was stalling out and creating these internal class divides, the founding fathers of the European project must have been banking on their backup plan, which was cultural assimilation.
Right, the grand social experiment.
Yeah, the theory, going all the way back to the Schuman Declaration in 1950, was always that a shared market creates a shared soul.
That was a dream.
Economic integration brings cultural identity. If we trade together, we will eventually think together. Did the data actually back that up?
It was a complete illusion. The data absolutely mercilessly shatters that assumption. The values of Northern and Southern Europe are not converging.
They're not.
No, they're tearing apart.
Wait, how do economists even measure something as subjective as culture or values? I mean, you can't put a price tag on a worldview.
Well, they utilize massive longitudinal data sets. primarily the European Value Surveys. These are comprehensive continent-wide polls taken from 1980 all the way through 2009, asking tens of thousands of citizens highly specific questions.
What kind of questions?
They don't just ask, hey, do you feel European? They ask granular questions about religiosity, views on sexual morality, the role of women in the workplace, and the role of the state in managing the economy.
Oh, so deeply personal stuff.
Very personal. By mapping the answers to these questions over 30 years, the researchers can track the literal trajectory of human belief systems.
And when they mapped those beliefs, the gap between the North and the South didn't shrink. It grew massively.
It widened significantly.
Now, here's where we get a major face-slapping fact. When you hear that the cultural gap between Northern Europe and Southern Europe is widening, the immediate, instinctual assumption is that Southern Europe must be going backward.
Right, that's what everyone thinks.
We assume places like Italy or Greece are becoming more traditional, more religious, more conservative, while the North moves steadily forward.
That is the standard narrative, and it is entirely wrong. Southern Europe did not go backward. They actually became significantly more modern over those 30 years. The data shows they became more secular, more tolerant, less traditional in their views on gender roles.
Wait, so they were moving in the right direction?
They were moving in the exact direction the integrationists wanted.
But the gap still widened. If the South was moving forward, how did the gap get bigger?
Because Northern Europe strapped on a modernization jetpack.
A jetpack.
Yes. The Nordic countries, Germany, the Netherlands, they sprinted into secular modern values so incredibly fast that they literally left the South in the dust. The gap widened not because the South stopped progressing, but because the North broke the sound barrier of cultural shift.
It's like watching two runners on a track. The runner representing the South is jogging forward at a steady, respectable pace. They're improving their lap times. They feel good.
Right.
But the runner representing the North suddenly straps experimental rockets to their shoes and just blasts off. The physical distance between them gets huge. But it's not because the South gave up. It's because the North is suddenly operating in a completely different stratosphere of secular modernization.
And this cultural divergence, this widening gap in how citizens view the world and the role of society, perfectly mirrors what the researchers call the institutional abyss.
Okay, explain the institutional abyss. Because again, the assumption is that being in the EU club forces everyone's institutions to level up.
That's the hope.
Right, like if you want to be in the club, your courts, your police, your bureaucracies have to meet a certain high standard.
The assumption is that proximity to excellence breeds excellence. But again, the data shows the exact opposite. The researchers measured the quality of government, the strictness of the rule of law, the efficiency of the courts, and the level of systemic corruption.
And what happened?
After the year 2000, which crucially is exactly when the euro truly takes hold, Southern Europe's administrative quality didn't just fail to catch up to the North.
Don't tell me it went backward.
It actually slid backward.
Oh my God. So let's put these pieces together because it paints a terrifying picture. They share the exact same currency. Their business cycles are pulsing in perfect rhythm. But culturally, the North is speeding away from them, and institutionally, their courts and governments are literally degrading compared to the North.
Yes.
Why does sharing a currency make your courts worse? That makes no intuitive sense.
We have to go back to that morphine trip we discussed earlier. The euro secretly assassinated the political motivation for institutional reform. Let's step into the shoes of a politician in a country with famously slow courts or highly inefficient, bloated administrative bureaucracies.
Okay.
Fixing those things is agonizing. It is political suicide.
Right, because reform isn't just a buzzword. It means firing people.
Lots of people.
It means fighting entrenched unions. It means angering powerful, wealthy interest groups who directly benefit from the corruption or the inefficiency.
It requires immense political capital and usually results in losing the very next election. Historically, politicians only undertake that kind of agonizing reform when their back is completely against the wall.
When the money runs out.
Exactly. They do it when their national currency is collapsing, when inflation is soaring, and when the international bond markets look at them and say, we refuse to lend you another dime until you clean up your courts.
But the euro gave them Germany's credit card.
Precisely. The disciplinary force of the bond market was totally neutralized. Why engage in political suicide to fix a broken bureaucracy when international investors are throwing billions of dollars of cheap credit at you anyway?
You just keep spending.
The shared currency artificially propped up these economies. It allowed them to finance their inefficiencies rather than fix them. It hid the institutional rot behind a facade of strong currency until it was far, far too late.
So the crash was inevitable.
Completely. By the time the 2008 global financial crisis hit and the tide finally went out, the institutional divergence between the North and the South was revealed to be a gaping chasm.
Okay, so if we pause and look at the scoreboard right now, economies stopped converging. Cultures are pulling apart at warp speed, and institutions are sliding backward into an abyss.
It's grim.
It is. At this point in the deep dive, it sounds like the cynical media narrative is completely vindicated. The narrative that says European nations are simply incompatible tribes, that a Frenchman, a German, and an Italian are just fundamentally biologically different in their worldviews and can never share a tent.
It is the absolute easiest conclusion to draw, and it is entirely false.
See, this is where this study gets absolutely brilliant. The data mercilessly shatters that stereotype. The cultural gap between European nations is mostly an illusion.
This was perhaps the most paradigm-shifting finding in the entire paper.
Oh, totally.
When the researchers analyzed the European value surveys, they didn't just look at national averages. They didn't just compare average France to average Germany. They looked at the individual beliefs of tens of thousands of specific citizens across the continent. And they ran a variance analysis.
And what did they find?
What they found was that the cultural difference within a single country is 10 times larger than the average difference between different countries.
I really need to stop you there because that defies everything we see on the news. 10 times.
10 times larger.
You are saying the cultural variance inside the borders of Germany is 10 times wider than the gap between Germany and Italy.
The math is undeniable. Let's make it concrete. If you take a random average citizen living in Munich, Germany, and compare their baseline cultural values to a random average citizen living in Naples, Italy, they are incredibly similar.
Really?
Yes. They cluster tightly together on issues of family, state role, and basic morality.
But how did the researchers know their algorithm wasn't just broken? I mean, if their mathematical model says a German and an Italian are basically the exact same person, a lot of sociologists would say, well, your tool is blunt. You're failing to capture the nuance of nationality.
That is a crucial methodological question. And to prove the algorithm wasn't just generating a false positive of unity, the researchers introduced a control group. They needed a benchmark.
Right.
So they added Turkey to the data set.
Which is fascinating because Turkey is geographically right there. It has been deeply intertwined with European history for centuries, and at various points, it has literally been a candidate for EU membership.
Exactly.
But it has a fundamentally different religious, historical, and institutional background.
Right. So they fed the survey data from Turkish citizens into the exact same algorithm. If the algorithm was just broken and designed to say everyone in the world is the same, Turkey would blend right in.
It would just join the blob.
But what happened? Immediately, the truth emerged. When the algorithm mapped out the cultural distances, all the European countries, France, Germany, Spain, Greece, they clustered tightly together in this massive overlapping blob.
Wow.
But Turkey sat on a completely different planet culturally.
So the control group proved the math actually worked. It proved that EU citizens actually are incredibly similar at their baseline.
Yeah.
The so-called massive differences between a French person and a German person only look huge when you zoom in incredibly close. The moment you step back and look at the rest of the world, you realize the European nations are standing shoulder to shoulder.
It forces us to ask a very uncomfortable question. If nationality isn't the primary thing that divides people in Europe,
what is?
Exactly, what is?
If it's not the flag on your passport, what actually dictates your worldview?
The researchers found it comes down to two primary metrics: your education and your wallet.
The diploma and the bank account.
Yes. Let's look at a hypothetical. A wealthy, highly educated investment banker living in Milan, Italy, has far, far more in common culturally, politically, and morally with a wealthy, highly educated tech executive living in Stockholm, Sweden, than they do with a poor, uneducated Italian factory worker living just 2 streets over in Milan.
Think about the implications of this for your own life if you're listening to this right now. If you look at the person living in the multi-million-dollar house at the end of your street, and then look at the person renting the basement apartment next door, this data suggests their worldviews are further apart than a Parisian's is from a Berliner's.
It's staggering.
The borders are fake. National borders are essentially artificial lines drawn over what is actually a massive continent-wide class divide.
Class and education dictate human values far more powerfully than geography. The real divide in Europe isn't horizontal, cutting across borders. It is vertical, cutting across social classes.
This totally dismantles the populist media narrative of incompatible nations. It isn't France versus Germany. It's the wealthy, cosmopolitan urban class versus the rural working class, universally across the entire continent.
Which is a profound and, frankly, terrifying realization for political stability.
Why terrifying?
It means the friction destroying European integration isn't necessarily because of insurmountable national differences. The friction is a deep structural class friction that is being misdirected and blamed on nationality.
Oh, wow.
Think about it. It's much easier for a politician to say, Brussels is ruining your life or Germany is exploiting us, than it is to address the systemic, deeply rooted inequality within their own borders.
Okay, I love this insight, but I have to play devil's advocate for a minute. Even if all these European nations are tightly clustered together in a big cultural blob, someone has to be in the dead center of that blob, right?
Every cluster has a core, yes.
Because historically, France has always paraded itself as the cultural and intellectual representative of Europe, the Enlightenment, the Revolution, the art. But the data just shattered France's ego, didn't it?
It really did. The researchers used a fascinating mathematical technique to calculate the literal cultural center of gravity for the entire European Union based on these human values.
The center of gravity.
Imagine balancing a map of Europe on the tip of a pencil, but the weight of the countries isn't based on their physical mass. It's based on their cultural norms. They wanted to find the centroid, the absolute normative core of European identity.
And France, Italy, and Greece, the countries that practically invented Western civilization, the Roman Empire, the Renaissance, weren't the center.
Not even close.
Where were they?
They were on the dark, distant fringes of the dataset. Geographically, you might think of them as central or foundational, but culturally, in the modern era, they are extreme outliers.
So who is the absolute cultural heart of Europe, according to the math?
Germany and Austria, they sit dead center at the cultural centroid.
It's exactly like a solar system.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Germany and Austria are the sun. They possess the massive gravitational pull in the center. France, Italy, and Greece are out orbiting like Pluto or Neptune. It's freezing out there on the fringe. And the further away you are from the sun, the more you resent the gravitational pull of that sun, telling you how fast you have to orbit.
That analogy captures the political reality perfectly. The researchers mapped this centroid and found a terrifying pattern in the voting data. They call it the centrifugal force.
Okay, the centrifugal force. That's the force that pushes things away from the center of the spinning objects, like when you're on merry-go-round and you feel like you're going to fly off the edge.
Exactly that dynamic. They measured individual citizens' fear of European integration. This means fear of losing their national identity, fear of losing their jobs to open borders, and fear of the central government in Brussels gaining too much power.
Okay.
And they found a direct, highly measurable correlation.
Let me guess. The further an individual's personal values are from that German-Austrian cultural center, the more intensely they fear the EU.
Yes. The mathematical distance from the core perfectly predicts the level of Euroscepticism. If your worldview aligns with the German centroid, you love the EU. If your worldview is distant from it, you fear the EU.
So Euroscepticism, the rise of populist anti-EU parties in places like Italy or France, isn't just random anger. It isn't just people being brainwashed by internet algorithms. It's a measurable mathematical distance from the normative core.
If we connect this to the macro politics of the last decade, it explains so much of the turbulence. The people living in the cultural periphery feel an immense gravitational pull from a center that they fundamentally do not relate to.
Right.
Brussels and Frankfurt are setting the monetary rules, the trade rules, and the legal frameworks. But those rules are implicitly based on a German or Austrian cultural baseline. If you are culturally French or culturally Greek, those rules feel completely alien. They don't feel like our rules. They feel like a foreign imposition.
Which brings us to the ultimate comparison. Because whenever we talk about massive, diverse, arguing continents, there's an elephant in the room: America.
Ah, yes, the American mirror.
The United States is deeply divided. We all know this. Texas and California argue constantly. They have wildly different cultures, different economies, different approaches to law and morality.
Very true.
Yet they share a powerful central government, a single military, and a single currency. And they survive. If America can do it with massive cultural gaps, Why is Europe falling apart?
To answer this, the researchers did something brilliant. They measured American states against European countries using the exact same cultural metrics from the value surveys.
Oh, that is smart.
They wanted to see if Europe was simply too diverse to function as a union, and the result is a total paradigm shift.
What did the data show?
The cultural differences within the United States are actually exactly the same, if not greater, than the cultural differences across Europe.
Wait, I really need to process that.
Yeah.
You were saying that culturally, ideologically, Texas and New York are further apart than Spain and Germany.
In many measurable ways, particularly regarding religion, the role of the state, and social conservatism, yes, the variance inside the U.S. is massive.
That is mind-blowing.
The cultural distance between a conservative in rural Alabama and a progressive in San Francisco is statistically as vast, or vaster, than the distance between a citizen of Athens and a citizen of Berlin.
Okay, so if culture isn't the roadblock to unity, because America proves definitively that you can have massive, continent-spanning cultural diversity and still function as a unified economic and political republic, what is the fatal obstacle for Europe? What is actually stopping them?
National pride, the ghost of history.
The ghost of history. Let's unpack that. How do you measure the ghost of history?
Well, the surveys asked people about their attachment to their nationality, and the results are stark. Despite decades of intense economic integration, despite the introduction of the euro, despite the dismantling of border checkpoints from 1980 to 2009, citizens did not become European.
They didn't?
No. In fact, the exact opposite happened. The psychological entrenchment deepened.
The percentage of people who identified as fiercely proud of their specific nationality skyrocketed, didn't it?
It did. It went from something like 37% in the 1980s to nearly 50% by the late 2000s. The more Brussels forced them to integrate their wallets and sink their economies, the more fiercely the citizens clung to their national flags.
So the attempt to erase borders economically made people build taller borders psychologically.
Beautifully put, yes.
And this creates what we can call a parasitic paradox in the public's mind. The survey data shows a massive, irreconcilable contradiction in what the European public actually wants from this union. Let's look at the two sides of this paradox.
On one hand, citizens desperately want the central EU government to act as their shield.
Right.
They overwhelmingly support shared European defense, unified border control against external threats, and continent-wide environmental protection.
Like 70 or 80%. Right.
Upwards of 70% or 80% of citizens across the board want Brussels to handle these massive global threats. They recognize that a single country like Italy can't negotiate with China or stand up to Russia alone.
So they want the central government to be their heavily armed bodyguard. They want the protection of a superpower.
But on the other hand, they aggressively, intensely refuse to share their wallets to pay for it.
Ah, there it is.
When you ask those same citizens if they support cross-border subsidies, meaning taking tax dollars from a rich, productive country like Germany to help build infrastructure or bail out a struggling country like Greece, support absolutely plummets.
So let me get this straight. The citizens of Europe demand that the central government act as their heavily armed bodyguard and global negotiator. But if the guy standing next to them in the union can't afford his dinner, they absolutely refuse to chip in a few bucks.
That's the paradox.
How can a union possibly survive if everyone demands the collective protection but aggressively refuses the shared sacrifice?
It cannot. It is mathematically and politically impossible. A federal union, by definition, requires risk sharing. It requires the strong to carry the weak during hard times. It requires the rich states to subsidize the poor states.
Like in the U.S.
Exactly. In the United States, wealthy states like New York and California routinely subsidize poorer states like Mississippi or West Virginia through federal taxes. But Europeans are fiercely opposed to this because they fundamentally lack a shared identity.
Which brings us back to the psychology of the taxpayer. Why does a citizen living in a Manhattan high-rise tolerate their tax dollars going to build a highway in Mississippi? But a citizen in Munich flat-out refuses to send their tax dollars to pay for pensions in Athens.
It comes down to historical timelines and the deep, often bloody scars of the past.
The ghost of history again.
Yes. The United States fought its brutal civil war over 150 years ago. Today, despite their massive political differences, Americans share a single dominant language, incredibly high geographic mobility. I mean, the people move between states for blocks constantly, and a 250-year mythos of nation building.
So even if they hate each other's politics, they're still family.
Exactly. When a New Yorker looks at a Mississippian, they might vehemently disagree with their politics, but they still see them as a fellow American. They see themselves as part of the same highly dysfunctional family.
And Europe.
Europe had a continent-destroying world war just 70 years ago. They speak dozens of different entrenched languages. They have deep, bloody historical scars and centuries of inherited prejudices.
You can't just erase that with a currency.
No. You can sync their bank accounts, you can force their business cycles to pulse together, you can erase the physical checkpoints at the borders, but you cannot easily erase their historical ghosts. In the US, the meta-identity of being American generally supersedes the sub-identity of being a Texan or a New Yorker.
Like in Europe.
In Europe, the identity of being French or Italian completely and totally overshadows the abstract bureaucratic identity of being European.
So we have an economic union running out of fuel, cultures diverging, and a population that refuses to share sacrifice.
Yeah.
What is the antidote? Because for decades, the famous Erasmus student exchange program was supposed to be the magic bullet to save Europe's identity.
Right, the Erasmus program.
The theory was, send the French kids to study at universities in Germany, send the Italian kids to Spain, let them drink together, study together, date each other. Why did that fail to fix the divide?
Because it's preaching to the choir. The data shows that these elite university-level exchange programs only work on people who already love the idea of Europe.
Well, that makes sense.
It self-selects for a group of cosmopolitan, highly educated, multilingual young people who already view themselves as global citizens.
So it doesn't reach the people who actually fear integration. It doesn't reach the factory worker in rural France or the farmer in Greece.
Exactly. To actually forge a lasting union, you don't need university exchanges for the elite. You need something much deeper and more foundational. The researchers suggest you need a unified, common history curriculum in everyday high schools for average citizens. You have to build the mythos of a shared destiny from the ground up, teaching a unified narrative of European history to 14-year-olds, long before their political identities are fully solidified by national pride.
But that takes generations, and we might not have generations. We are watching a real-time race between economic integration and cultural fragmentation. When the speed of combining our wallets completely outpaces our ability to agree on who we are, massive alliances shatter.
That is the defining tension of our era, not just in Europe, but globally. The assumption that economics conquers all has been completely proven false.
Look at the modern world around us. Are we just repeating the exact same fragmentation that led to the nightmares before WWII, just hidden behind modern, closed borders and digital algorithms? If a union's shared bank account runs dry before a shared identity is ever formed, what happens to the people trapped inside that house? It's a terrifying question. Something for you to deeply consider the next time you hear a politician promise that global economic integration will magically bring world peace.